Sutra Secrets of Life and Philosophy for the Modern World, the Great Sexual Repression.
So we have a great deal of sexual repression in this country. We'll talk about the 1950s and the 1960s, but it seems like in the year 2000s, with what happened with COVID and people being directly stuck in their homes for a couple of years, we have a sexual repression. You see it in religion, even though God should not be part of your sexual being. And the Bible and others do give good advice, but that's not really relevant for our day. And anybody who says it is just trying to repress you. And so sexual repression, I'm finding more and more prevalent and outwardly vocal. And it's really none of their business what you do. And I'm not sure why they consider themselves that in that position, but they do. And it's something to watch out for. But you as a being can be sexually positive and enjoy your sexual activity to the ultimate, to the best you can. And it helps you develop a mature attitude about sex and sexuality.
And philosophy for the modern world.
And men would strive after that. Now you have to understand that this culture was very, they weren't monogamous, they were very non-monogamous, some ethically, sometimes not ethically, depending on your moral view, but this culture that this comes from is not, they had multiple wives, they were polyamory, they were polyamorous, they were polygamous, they were just ethically non-monogamous also. So that's kind of the situation with accumulating wealth. But I mean, today there are women who greatly look for men who have the idea of accumulation of wealth, or they have the idea of making a great deal of money. Sadly, those marriages last about 10 years, and then they go on to another woman, or they have mistresses on the side, and they had courtesans on the side, concubines, and not the word for it, but they were like paid for mistresses, and the rich do today too. They do it quite often. So it is not just for the wealthy class, it is for everybody to enjoy sex as a spiritual being. So in the days of the Kama Sutra being assembled, and before, there was a great amount of prostitution, and basically concubines, paid wives / secondary wives. There's been quite a bit written about it in brothels in Richard Burton's time, and so we find that today there's been a huge increase in women wanting to sell their attention online. They call it pay for play, and you'll be on a messaging service and they'll say, oh, they do charge. So that's had a massive increase. It's sort of like pornography, online prostitution, but it's not actual sex usually. It's not actually anything that's true. It's kind of a made-up thing. But we're finding it affects young males. I mean, young males now, when they get curious about sex, they look online, they see every sort of thing they could want to see. And those who want to repress the internet, good luck, that's not going to happen. That's funny, every time, it's like they were, the original lawsuit with, I think it was Penthouse, and the original lawsuit about pornography, it was funny. So in their defense, they said, well, here is what people view in motels in their homes in this state, and the state was Utah. And they said they have a higher ratio of pornography than they do in other states. And so it's like you can't repress pornography, you can't repress pay for play. Prostitution's been pretty old. It's talked about even in the Bible. And concubines, which means like secondary wives or paid wives, mistresses as we call them today, is still very common today. And some people think it has its place. The harm they do in trying to repress it is probably well documented, and it's also not the best way to deal with something like that. A better way to deal with it is to have it become open and legal, and that's other countries have expressed that, and they have found that it being legal makes it safer for everybody concerned. So one of the things you figure out about the lifestyle is that there is a second level of sex and social contact when it comes to the swinging lifestyle. And one of the things you do come to grips with is that you may or may not be good at sex when you begin, but most of the men and women are very good at it by the end of their session in the swinging lifestyle. So that's a question that's been asked of me, is how do you get out of the lifestyle? And to me, it's a lot like pornography today on the internet and some others. You can pass a bunch of stuff, laws or whatever, but the genie's out of the bottle. And so you need to look at you as a being, a personal being, and what you want. Your partner, yes, you should look at them as a personal being and accept what they want. But it's something that it's like the genie's out of the bottle. There's the water leaked out of the jar. It's really hard to put it back in, and that's something to keep in mind before consensual non-monogamy. But it's certainly true about sexual openness. The brutalness it takes to bring people under repression, sexual repression, is something I don't think society will deal with, will stand for today. I think there would be mass demonstrations and riots. And so they started cleverly, like, God said this. Well, a lot of the stuff they said Jesus felt, he didn't feel that way because they know his culture. So it's like all these hypocrites are running around saying, we want to control your sex. Well, why do you have any rights in the bedroom? You don't. You should say that to them. You don't have any rights in my bedroom. And any God that would care what I do in the bedroom is a puny, small, little, tiny God. Nobody should worship that kind of God. Anyway.
And philosophy for the modern world.
So the Kama Sutra was brought to us in modern times by a man who was born in 1813, and his name was Richard Burton. Not the movie star, but he was a linguist. He was a pretty smart man, and he believed in open sexuality. His wife knew all about it, and she did some too. But he would tour around different countries, learn their languages. He came across he would wonder about famous old books that weren't commonly known, and he had a sexual interest about consensual non-monogamy also, and so he started to assemble some of the different versions of this book, and he put them together for our modern time. It's funny that they were so provincial that he couldn't publish it without punishment in his place in England, and so he formed a society of translators, and him, one other guy, a translator, translated the book for publication. And they couldn't publish it under their names, but they could from the society that they were in. And so they formed this to keep out of legal trouble, which they did. It's kind of funny. He was a sex tourist. The other thing that they talk about in most of the books, when you read about the history, is the Crusaders were sexual tourists too. They went from a very, what we would consider disgusting hygiene times and discussing sexual times, and barbaric is what we would consider it, to then finding cultures that made an elegance out of sexuality and made an elegance out of sex, and that kind of changed their behavior. When they got home, they started setting up different rules coming from that region of the world. So that was an interesting thing, that there's sexual tourism. So the Crusaders are mostly rich men who were barbaric in a lot of ways and ruthless, and they would go and they did a lot of harm, but they did bring back sexual elegance, sexual information that was different than their times. So Isabel was Richard Burton's wife. They know by their private letters to each other that she was also somewhat involved in the fascination with sex that he enjoyed most of his life. They also know that he had a lot of close male companions. They were wondering if he was homosexual. He does do some documents about women and men, so it might be that he was bisexual. The older in years, he seemed to have more male company. Anyway, so that's kind of an overview, but he was consensually non-monogamous. His wife knew about it, and they know by their private letters. And she was head over heels in love with him, and they had a good relationship that I can tell, and historically they did. So that's kind of a recap of Richard Burton and his sexuality.